Mr. Chandra completed his electrical engineering from VJTI College in Mumbai and went on to pursue his MBA in Finance and Strategy from Boston College. Mr. Chandra is currently the Managing Director of Bain Capital Private Equity and is also part of the firm's Asian Senior Leadership Team. Prior to this, he served as a Managing Director, Board Member and Head of Global Markets and Investment Banking at DSP Merrill Lynch Limited. Mr. Chandra is also closely associated with the Tata Group as a trustee on the Tata Trust Board and as a non-executive director of Tata Sons. He is a director at Emcure Pharmaceuticals Limited, Genpact Limited, Akanksha Foundation and Give India. Among his many associations in the non-profit space, he is also one of the founders of Ashoka University. Mr. Chandra has received various awards during his illustrious career. He was named in Asia's Heroes of Philanthropy list by Forbes in 2016 along with his wife. A Next Generation Philanthropic Leader of the Year by Forbes in 2013 and a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum in 2007. While being on various boards of global and Indian companies, it is not the corporate space in which Mr. Chandra spends most of his time. His interest lies in the social sector. Mr. Chandra and his wife, Mrs. Archana Chandra, pledge to annually give away 75% of their net earnings towards social causes. Ladies and gentlemen, give a huge round of applause for a guest of honor, Mr. Amit Chandra. Over to you, ma'am, for the fireside chat.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Chandra, for being here this morning. I know that it's been almost a year since we've been talking. No, nothing to say that, and the very first day when you talked to me and you said, I want to come to your institution, I wasn't still ready for it, ready for you. And so I just kept saying, yes, maybe next month, maybe next month. And I'm so glad that we could finally make this happen when we are absolutely having the full range of students over here. So the students that we have here today are students from 2 schools and some students from even the design school. But design school have their reviews going on, so a lot of the students couldn't join in. But we have students from the School of Management and Entrepreneurship, both the postgraduate students and the 3-year undergraduate students that we have. We also have the School of Communication and a large number of students from there too. I think very soon we'll need very many bigger auditoriums if we have to accommodate all 3 years, all 3 schools. We did a little kind of exercise before you came in, and we sent out an email to everyone to say, if you have any questions, this is going to be a town hall model, send in your questions. And a large number of students did send in the questions. And so what I did last night was club together a large number of different kinds of people who had asked a similar question. So I'm going to start the very first question, which I think a large number of students have asked, and I'm going to give those names out so that you can just stand up very quickly so Mr. Chandra can see who's asking this question. Mohit Chabria, Lakshya Gupta, Shubham Malpani, Viraj Pisal, Kush Porwal, Arshit Jain, Paras Panushali, Shubham Mehta, Preena Masrani, Vedant Tulsian and Somya Chaplot. Are you all there? Okay, fine. Thank you so much. Your question here is the question that everybody is wanting to ask really is from engineering to investment banking, then to director of boards, then you start a university, and then now it's philanthropy. What has been your secret sauce that kept you going on this journey?
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me, ma'am. And please call me Amit, even if I call you ma'am. It's truly a pleasure to be here. Thank you for starting this remarkable university. If I was still a student, I'd love to come here. The most exciting thing I think that's happening in India at this point of time is actually the birth of institutions like this. at this point of time. And Archana and I truly have the privilege to be involved in the creation of Ashoka University. We've also started getting involved in the creation of Kriya, another university down south. And it's fascinating to see my friend down the road, Ajay, will start another university in Ahmedabad for design. So I think that's truly great, because for long, I think we stopped investing in institutions of higher learning. And I think institutions like you, what you're building is truly the need of the hour. So my compliments. It's wonderful to see such bright young faces in this room. So it's really a privilege for me to be here. Thank you for that. I think I must confess that I don't think when I started on this on the journey that I got onto, I truly knew that it would take so many twists and turns. I actually started my journey with relatively simple aspirations. I come from a middle class family, and when I went, I was really privileged that my education was paid for. For most of my life, I've studied on scholarships, something that I've not forgotten, which is why my wife and I are involved in funding a lot of scholarships via the institutions that we built. But the thing that I aspired for when I went off to the US and I saw that there was amazing amount of philanthropy which was involved in creation of Western society. People used to keep talking about giving in India, but it wasn't really evident to me. So when I, came back, I had two or three very simple but high bars for myself. The first bar, I remember I came back and I said to myself, and I never talked about this openly till I started getting interviewed much later, was first that I wanted to be a CEO of a large company by the time I was 40. So I said, I must try to get there. The second is I wanted to be a crorepati by the time I was 40.
I think this is the path that most students like to follow.
So I said, I must, and the third is I said I must give back, and I said I shouldn't start giving back when I make it. I must start giving back as I make it. So I started my journey, and I remember, as soon as I got married, which was within a year of coming back, I was really fortunate to meet a student of yours, Archana, and we got married. And I was very fortunate that I joined an awesome company, which was a small company called DSP Financial Consultants. The year after I joined them, they became DSP Merrill Lynch, and I was at the bottom of the pack. But I got a great mentor, Guru Hemendra Kothari, who taught me the right things, the right values, and I started my journey at that point of time. Little did I know, I made the shift from engineering to finance thanks to my education in the US. I really made that shift for one simple reason. I enjoyed engineering enormously. I worked at Larsen & Toubro. It was the best place for training. I really feel privileged. You mentioned outside that you have a L&T Finance Training Center. It's actually one of my most profitable investments. I sat on the board of that company for many years. It's been a very high return investment for me. It's something I'm very proud of. But I realized in those days when I looked at my boss, his boss, his boss, his boss, there was very little future in engineering in those days, because it took 60, 70 years to get there. Really at the end of your career, you kind of got there with a measly salary. And I was much more ambitious. So when I came back, I said I wanted to enter finance. And that's how the shift from engineering to finance actually happened. And I think in finance, I think I was just lucky to be at the right place at the right time. And that's one of the lessons I've learned, that sometimes the choices that you make are really important. You've got to be very clear. I made one choice that I decided to come back. I didn't want to be a small fish in a big pond and be in the US. I wanted to come back and be a big fish in a small pond. And India was an exciting place. I decided to come back. The second important choice I made was DSP was the worst paying job offer I had for the toughest, toughest master. I had multiple job offers, including from some good friends of yours and mine. And one of them jokes with me as to why I didn't accept his offer, which was much higher and for a better title. But DSP was the one that gave me the toughest time in the job interviews, and I was very clear that I would get the best training out there. And I decided to go to join DSP for that reason. It was the best decision I made. I got an amazing set of values from Hemendra. I remind him even now, he remains my guru and one of my best friends, that in my 14 years that I spent at DSP, rising from the bottom to the top of the firm, he praised me 2 times in those 14 years. He abused me virtually every day.
Would be familiar for many people working with me.
Yes, yeah, his abuses also tend to be pretty choice Gujarati words. I learned a lot of Gujarati in those years. But it was the best training I got in values, in ethics, work ethic, as well as other forms of ethic. But it was an amazing experience. And you have to make very important choices when you start careers. I never traded a job, my job for any other job, irrespective of what people offered me in terms of higher salaries, in terms of better titles. I just stuck with what I had. And by the time I was 35, we had a 35% market share. And of course, as India boomed, we boomed. And of course, then Hemendra, for many personal reasons, some of which decided to sell the company to Merrill Lynch. And we sold it for $1 billion, which was a lot of money in those days. I was at the peak of my career. I was in my 30s, and it was difficult for me to continue doing what I was doing. I pretty much achieved the goals I'd set for myself, and I needed a new goal in my life. And so I decided to seek some new goals, which was an unusual thing to do, and decided to reset my entire career and become an investor. And so that landed up actually, it was an unusual decision. A lot of my friends, one of them is in the audience, and they were really wondering what I was doing and why I was doing. But I decided for being a highly successful banker to being virtually starting a new career afresh. And then I spent 10 years trying to learn a completely new craft as an investor. But also at the same time, I started a new journey in philanthropy, because running a bank never allowed me to pursue my interests in the social sector with passion. And of course, along the entire way, I had a third objective, which I mentioned, which was giving. The interesting thing was, even when we had little money, my wife and I remember in our first year of marriage, we couldn't afford renting a house. So we used to stay as paying guests on Altamount Road in a one-room house. But we had started giving even in those years. And we kept, as we started fortunately earning more and more, started inculcating the habit of giving more and more. And that gave us a sense of purpose away from just accumulating wealth. And while wealth can actually go to your head and make you do a lot of crazy things, but fortunately for us, we capped our needs. And there were other inflection points that made us think about the purpose of wealth more interestingly, and use that wealth more for building schools, universities, hospitals, and we've had the privilege of getting involved with a lot of very interesting things with a lot of very interesting people. And so the last 10, 15 years, as I've moved away from running a bank to building a private equity firm, it has given me more time to get more involved with doing some of these, and now I spend half my time in private equity and half my time in the social sector. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, this is good. One of the first lessons that we've learned today in this very first question that we've asked is that as young people, when you come in, please look at the challenges that a job offers you rather than the salary. Please. Because this is something I always find people to say, but they are not offering me a good package. What's the package? The package is the challenge of the job.
And look at your boss very, very carefully and what you're going to learn from the boss, and don't move jobs very often.
And you have this wonderful boss who also now teaches me more about tigers. He's got this great thing, he's saving the white tiger. And it's amazing, but I must say all the young HRites who worked at DSP Merrill Lynch today are in great jobs and say that their learning came from there. So I think that's your first lesson. Aditi Kashyap, you had the similar question. Are you around? Yeah, so you had a similar question which of course has been answered. That was this always your plan A, and I think that's answered.
It was never my plan, and my plan has evolved, and I don't know what the future holds for me either.
Thank you. So we've got a question which, first is going to be a little related to your financial sector, and then we are moving into philanthropy. We have Unnati. She comes to us from Dubai. Why don't you all stand up? Harsh Godwani, where are you? Are you around? Harsh is over here. And Shreyas Gandhi. Are you here? Okay. The three of them have asked this question. Putting on your investment hat, now here are these finance kids, so let them ask that question. Putting on your investment hat, which sectors you think will be in the forefront in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so I think India is actually a very, very interesting place at this point of time, and we've been very fortunate. We've invested nearly $3 billion actually in India in the last 6-7 years, so we've been one of the most prolific investors in the country, and we've had actually a great run investing here. If you just look at what we have invested in, we've put over $1 billion recently into Axis Bank, and we've in recent times made a large investment in L&T Finance. So obviously our bias for very evident from that. The reason for that is when you think the economy is going to generally do well, financial services is an interesting way to play economic revival, and we think well-managed financial services companies are obviously going to do reasonably well. But I think in the next few years, we're also going to see the revival of the Indian consumption theme. I think the Indian consumer was in the last few years challenged for a number of reasons. GST, as it was getting absorbed in the economy, as there was a temporary setback to consumption because of demonetization. As all of that plays itself out, you will see consumption bounce back. We're already beginning to see some of that, and that will, I think, gather steam and momentum, and we will begin to see strong consumption, and that will, be evident as we go into the next, 2 or 3, 4 years. Particularly once you get to an inflection point, and we've seen this in the rest of East Asia. Once you get to an inflection point, people's ability to spend gets better and better and better, and that's what's happened in the dragon countries. I think we'll therefore see very strong consumption. Also, importantly, a lot of India is dependent on agricultural income. As the state governments and the central government do things to repair agricultural balance sheets, which I think people have realized that we need to do that with some urgency. You will see consumption spends actually improve substantially. So I think consumption, anything that's FMCG, pharmaceuticals, etc., will improve substantially in the next few years. So I think consumption as well as financials will be two very important areas that one should, in my view, watch out for. I think, again, health is going to be another very important area. We have very low penetration of healthcare in this country. I think as we see insurance coming in, on the back of that, you will see both providers as well as pharmaceutical companies benefit enormously from that. So I think that's going to be another sector that is worth watching for. I think in general exports will be somewhat muted because of everything that's happening globally. But there will be obviously some micro trends which will be worth looking at. IT in general, I think, should do well. But otherwise, the other areas in exports will probably have their challenges. But overall, I see India's having a pretty good run in the next 4-5 years.
So this is one question that I would like to just add to this. Will education ever get into the realm of for-profit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I personally, we've hesitated investing in education in India. We've invested in education in China and made a lot of money doing that. And I've always pressed on the brake whenever education opportunities in India have come up. The reason being that I think our policymakers, don't want to see for-profit players really get involved. Even though I think if there is clearly a case at the high end for that to happen. So I think even though the logic exists, I don't think it will actually happen because, in India generally the way I've seen policy evolve is that you need at least 3-4 years of serious conversation amongst a lot of players before you see policy taking root. I don't think that conversation is even happening at this point of time.
I agree, and one of the other themes which we are facing today is that it's urban cities. You're talking about smart cities, but they're not talking about vertical universities.
Oh yeah.
Right? They're only talking about land. And we brought the campus into the corporates. And we're now hoping and pitching with the government to say that our built-up area is equivalent to the land that we would have. Look at this.
It's very myopic. I mean, there's lots of regulations in India, extremely myopic. I think, I don't know when those things will change, but yeah, I agree with you.
So I think one of the other questions that Sapna has, may I just ask that question? So she is a So Sapna's question here, she leads our faculty in finance, and a smart question, Sapna, to say, should you invest in a company that's commercially doing well or ethically doing well?
Logically both. I think a company that's ethically not doing the right thing will generally run a sprint and not a marathon. I don't want to give you names, but I have seen that there are companies that have actually tried to ethically compromise, done something, created a lot of wealth, and then faltered. So it doesn't generally land up being the right thing from a long-term perspective. You can get away with it, but it's like musical chairs. Ultimately, someone will end up holding the baby. So I think, have to have a balance of both.
I have a young boy here, Rishabh Patrawala. He's from the undergrads, okay, and these were some of the others were postgrads. He's got a very interesting question which says, companies like Facebook and Google have targeted the underserved masses in India. When will Indian companies follow?
I think that's a great question, and in fact, I was just deliberating that the other day with an Indian entrepreneur who wants to exactly do that. And I don't know why Indian companies are not doing that in the technology space. They're certainly doing that in non-tech sectors. They realize that there's a great opportunity at the bottom of the pyramid, and so you see, lots of companies in the, whether it's in the FMCG space, in the healthcare space, go after, after consumers at the bottom of the pyramid. Even in the telecom space, everybody has a proposition for, the postpaid consumer, for example. So I think there is clearly a big opportunity to do that. I think Jio, for example, clearly understands that and is trying to build some apps targeted at the consumer who is, for example, the farmer. So I think this will change. I think it requires very deep pockets because you got to invest with a 10-year view because the bleed is going to be enormous. Those customers are not going to break in break even for a long period of time. So you really require deep-pocketed capital, which is, so it requires very long-term investing. If you think, step back and think about it, very few Indian families have the ability, Indian companies have that ability. Maybe the Tata Group has it, Reliance has it. Beyond that, very few people have the ability to take that kind of view. So I think it will happen, but it will happen in exception rather than by the rule, which is really a pity. It's a great question.
Thank you, Rishabh. So then there is this whole lot of people, and I'm going to call all their names out, and they have one very good question, I would say. Simran Rohra, Mirza Dirani, Harshita Shetty, Swarna Shah, Vimi Patel, Sakshi Sureka, Manasha from WPP, we have Vishal Jain, we have Zuvi Doka, we have Twisha Banerjee, we have Mehek Shah, and we have Harshal Dakle. Are you all here? Okay. The very simple and a good question, and I think a very practical question from their point of view, and I would say from the point of view of us as faculty, is what would you say are the first steps to start giving back to society? Thank you.
Great question. I think the first is simply overcoming inertia. I think everybody inherently has some inertia inherent in herself or himself. That inertia prevents us from doing something. If we are able to overcome that inherent inertia, I think the process begins. When we want to eat a pizza, we pick up the phone and we figure out which is the best pizza available, right? But when we want to give, we make that equation incredibly complicated. Whether it is time, whether it is money, we somehow just, oversolve for it. When we want to eat pizza, we'll make a mistake. If that pizza is wrong, we'll next time not order it from the same place, we'll find another place. Giving is exactly like that. If we make a mistake, we'll next time do something different. And giving, if we don't have money, we can give time, right? It can be to help someone with the skills that we have, and even if we give money, it's very simple. There are various ways to give. There are lots of organizations that will help you make an informed choice, on the net. You can, look at a lot of information. You can, they will give you feedback reports. And even if you make a mistake, you can, so what? You can make, a mistake and move on and, do something else the other time. But it is overcoming that inertia that somehow we have, that's, I think, the first step. I think once we overcome that inertia, my general experience has been that it's the first time that the decision goes right. You experience some sort of joy in that giving, in that right decision that then gets you to do the same thing the next time. It was great to see, the video where a number of you all went out to a village and experienced an activity for with your own hands. I think that actually is the best way to experience some form of giving. Because unless often people think giving is about doing something for someone else. In my view, actually, it's doing something for yourself. Because at the end of the day, this is about experiencing empathy, which generally is making yourself a better person, and it's about improving society. We do these two things, I think, at the end of the day, less for the beneficiary and more for making a sustainable society and about making ourselves better people. So I think once we start understanding that, then I think the whole equation starts changing.
In fact, just yesterday, and this is the new batch of the postgraduate has just come in, we make them go through an order. But then he saw a little child sitting there who had not had dosa, and he shared it with that. So, we're trying to bring in, because I think there are two Indias together, and the India that's privileged is not sensitized to the fact that the India that's not so privileged. And education, to me, and I've always felt this, and that's why Arva talked about our school social responsibility, having credit courses, is because I think education to me is not the curriculum that they're going to do, because at the end of the day, they're all going to have that curriculum and do well. It's, are they sensitive to the fact that if they don't carry that India along with them, they're not going to do well. And that's what it is. Another question that I wanted to ask, which is from my daughter-in-law, and she's nursing a baby, so she's not here. And especially when she knew you were coming, she said, she wanted to know how philanthropy that you do, or when you give money especially, how do you measure that that is it's reaching where it should? How do you really measure that?
Yeah. So I think for Archana and me, most of our giving, the way we do it is we are quite involved with it. So, we've made sure that it's quite organized. We have, of course, a team that works with us. We have a foundation, and there's a team involved in monitoring things. But we have two levels of organizations that we support. We have about 35 organizations that we support. The core organizations are organizations that either she or I are on the boards of, and that we have fairly good sense of, how the money has broadly been spent in those organizations. The chunk of the money we can see. I mean, like for example, our biggest beneficiary has been Ashoka University, and I spend at least a day a month, and sometimes more at Ashoka, so I can see exactly what's happening out there. I can see what the plans are, how many students are benefiting, how many on scholarships, etc. At least 40% of our students actually are on scholarship out there. So I have a good sense of what the returns are, how the institution is getting built, what the plans are. The area where I spend most of my time is actually in water sustainability with farmers working in Marathwada and Vidarbha. I travel reasonably extensively to those areas. We know every season how many villages we are working on, which are the organizations, partner organizations that are working in those areas, how many dams are being desilted, how many new structures are being built. So we have actually built a data collection network to know exactly how much water capacity is getting created, how many farmers are being impacted. So we have a fairly good sense, and this comes a little bit. I'm a reasonable. I would call myself a nerd. I have a data orientation towards things. I do measure the social ROI of our spend. So I look carefully at how many rupees are being spent, and broadly measure what the return on these investments are. Every time the return may not be over a 1-year period, sometimes it's over a 3-year period or over a 5-year period, but I have different kind of parameters on different investments, social investments. So it may be different for a university, it may be different for on a water sustainable project, but I have broadly returns for different things. Some things, returns are very different. We are doing right now a project on extreme violence against women, which we are funding, and it's tough. It's going to be tougher to have a metric to measure that, but we are still trying to see how we're going to measure it. So some things are tough to measure, some things are easier to measure, but I try to have measurement because that keeps me and the team focused on milestones. Because I personally believe that if you don't have milestones, then you don't hold yourself accountable to them. So I do have milestones for everything I do.
Thank you. That's a great answer. You just talked about Archana, your wife, and I have very, very pleasant memories of her as my student. So, here's Priyal Damadia. Are you around? Where's Priyal Damadia? Is he there? No, he's there, young lady. She wanted to know if your wife had been your inspiration.
Yeah. So my wife actually is equal partner in everything I do at the foundation, and she's quite an amazing person. She's very complimentary in many ways to what I do. I'm a very good big picture guy. Relative to her, she's very good with details, and so she holds. So I'm the accelerator, she's the brake. So we are often, she stops me from making stupid mistakes. But she's actually very inspirational with, she's been able to build a great team. She runs a foundation which is one of the largest foundations in the country, working with people with intellectual disabilities. It's called Jai Vakil Foundation. And, so two of us engage very actively in everything that we do. I think, yes, she's, for me, she's an amazingly inspiring person, and conversations around the dinner table tend to be quite exciting. We don't always agree on everything, but generally I think she wins. That keeps the marriage going. Yeah, I think she's definitely an equal partner in everything we do. I do spend disproportionately more time on what we do because unfortunately she doesn't give me as much time as I would like for the foundation.
So, as a man said, I'm happily married. She's happy and I'm married. So, that's how.
No, I'm happily married. Period.
So, Vedant and Utsav, so there's one more question which I think Vivek Bafna and Priyan Gala talked about, the inspiration that James Bond Chuck Freeney had for you. I've never heard of Chuck Freeney, and so they wanted to know more about it. Thank you.
That's a great question. Chuck Feeney is simply amazing man. And for those of you who haven't, I'm sure most of you may not have heard of him, but you can YouTube a video called Giving While Living, and his name will pop up. There's also a book called The Billionaire Who Wasn't, which is his autobiography. He's the man who's inspired Bill Gates, Warren Buffett to do what they have done in philanthropy and lesser models. A whole range of people have been inspired by him. I think all of our lives in some ways have been touched by him, mainly because I think all of us have traveled and we've shopped at duty-free stores. Duty-free stores were started by him. He made $8 billion doing that, which is equivalent of 56,000 crores. But having done that, one fine day when he was an Irish miner's son, so he started with nothing, made all that money. He one day decided to walk into his lawyer's office, signed all that wealth except for $5 million that he gave to his children and $5 million that he kept for himself. He signed everything into a philanthropic trust, irrevocable philanthropic trust, much against his lawyer's advice, and walked away into sunset. He moved into a rented house in San Francisco and started managing that philanthropy. It was called the Atlantic Philanthropies. The beneficiaries of all that money had only one condition, that they could not report who the recipient of all the generosity was. Over many decades, a lot of miraculous things happened. The entire healthcare system of Vietnam got built. HIV in South Africa got solved. The education system of Ireland got built. Cornell University as it exists today got built. The hospital system of San Francisco got built. The Irish peace settlement was solved because of his credibility on the table. Many amazing things happened, and then the information about him became public when a tax dispute brought everything in the public domain, and people became aware of the fact that he was the man behind all of that. And that's how the billionaire who wasn't got written about. His only condition when the money was put into the trust was that everything had to be given away during his lifetime. And so the trust had to be wound out before he passed away, which is why it was called the Giving While Living movement. And when it all became known in the public domain. It really inspired Bill Gates to do what he did, Warren Buffett to do what he did. Many of us who came to know about what he did were really moved. A friend of mine, Abhay Haldar, sent me the book. It inspired me also to follow his footsteps. I had the privilege, Archana, me and my daughter Anika, had the privilege to, after much pestering, get invited to his house. I've met him, a couple of times since. He stays in a small rented apartment in San Francisco, just the most amazing man. But I don't think any single human being has impacted our 2-3 generations as much as that man has.
And today in India, you're the James Bond for these young people.
I think Jamshedji Tata probably is.
They won't even.
I think I have the privilege of managing his trust.
No, but I told them to, when I was in the class yesterday, I told them, I said, it's not that we, are talking about corporate India, or he's not representing that. He's here today because you started giving at a very young age, and I think that's something that Arva talked about, that we are trying to inculcate in our students. The rural immersion that I talked about, that you talked about, we've had great difficulty. I tried for 25 years in HR college to bring in mandatory somebody to go to the rural areas. But the University of Mumbai had no marks given to it, so nobody was going. I have now included it as a credit course again, and so people have to do it. But my problem was urban kids going to rural areas, and the very first night when I sent these kids out, this was an earlier experiment, and the damn young man goes for a shower at 11 p.m. in the night and gets bitten by a scorpion. Here in Mumbai, he doesn't take a shower at all, but he has to go and do it. So I had to get very good urban facilities. And I was very fortunate then that we met Ainir, who's running urban housing in rural areas, now where our children go and stay, because you need these facilities. So I think the first day, Arva, they go and meet the farmer, they meet the villagers. Second day, they follow the villagers, and third day, they eat with the villagers. That's the 3-day program. Yeah. Anyway, that's very interesting. Omkar, you're the only one who's going to be allowed to ask a live question. He, just to introduce him, he is our entrepreneur evangelist. I produced managers, accountants, bankers, and lawyers in HR college, but our sole ambition here is to have entrepreneurs. Because as Ranjit tells me every day, 23 million babies are being born every year, but jobs are not going to be even 1 million. And we need people to be job creators. Omkar is one of those.
That's a great ambition, by the way.
Yes, so we're trying to do that. How many of you, I'm just making a random thing, because you're studying management, you're studying finance, you're doing entrepreneurship. How many of you would like to be entrepreneurs? Oh, wow.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
And let me tell you, this is not yours.
No, that is great.
And thanks to Omkar and his team. Yes, Omkar, come on, go for it.
No, I think I would like to. Sorry. Fantastic responses, by the way. Loved every answer.
There is one last one which I'm going to ask him later.
Okay. This is actually to one of your responses about how at the bottom of the pyramid there are a lot of FMCG companies venturing out because that's an underserved market. And you are saying that it's imperative for the technology companies to now venture out. My contention over here is, of course, like this is also wearing the investor's hat, that the adoption curve and the learning curve at the underserved market for a technology startup, and I come from a space of tech startups, is relatively way higher. What do you suggest? How can one invest in shortening the learning curve of the underserved market so that the tech startups can open up to them?
It's a real tough one. Look, I think you've got to shorten any learning curve. I think you have to do 2 things. One is you have to hear the voice of the consumer, and the second is you have to look very carefully at what other people have done to shorten learning curves. The good news about our market is that we are a follower and not actually a leader. We've seen massive adoption of technology in other, including developing markets like. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, you know, but you look at even China. You look at China, and it's got like I'm amazed by the number of $5 billion, $10 billion companies which were like startups just 5 years ago, 3 years ago. And look at some of these and what they do, and I say, this is mind-boggling. It just shows you how much opportunity exists out here, right? Why are we not looking at these companies, and why are we not studying very closely at what is it that they did it? So, in my mind, I think what we need to do is do those two things very carefully, which is hear our consumers very carefully at what their problems are. We often do not hear consumer problems carefully. And second, we don't look very carefully at the evolution of other markets and how people have solved problems there. I think the intersection of those two things can, in my mind, be extremely, extremely exciting. I'll give you an example. I just posted something on my Facebook page yesterday. I was looking at a BBC documentary. Not documentary, actually, it's a 3-minute clip on a Ugandan entrepreneur who's come up with a low-cost device that costs less than $100, which can actually store food waste. Okay, it can take food waste in any farm and can store it for 2 years. Okay, very simple, right? So he's found a way that, and his point was that in Uganda there are tons of farmers who are basically having 30 to 50% loss of production. And so he's just, and when you look at that device, it looks like a tin box, okay? And so he said that these people are having massive loss of production. So and he calls it some dabba or something, can take this and it essentially finds a way how to elongate the life of the wastage by 2 years. I looked at that and I said, oh my God, I mean, if you really look at it, we have the same problem in India. Massive farm to table wastage. So this is a massive opportunity in India, right? So I put that on my Facebook page and I said, any entrepreneur out there, you know, this is a huge problem in India, okay? And any budding entrepreneur, you want a travel grant, just write a 1-page proposal to our foundation. We will fund you for a 1-week travel grant to Uganda. I already have 35 responses in period of 24 hours, right? Because just think about it, this problem has existed for so many years. Decades actually, not years, right? So people have been knowing about problems. The problem is people only want to do problems which come to them in their area. People don't travel to consumers and listen to problems. There's somebody sitting in Uganda solving a problem. This is not even China. So often people need to just be aware of what problems exist, talk to consumers, and then understand how these problems are being solved in other markets and look at that intersection and go out and solve them. Like Uber, everybody knows about Uber. Like people have solved Uber taxis in markets like Africa by making motorcycle taxis. Why is that not being done in rural areas in India? So I was in a place called Ambe Jogai in Beard district, which is a district in Marathwada, and I was talking to a local entrepreneur. This happened 2 months ago, and he was asking me, he was telling me, you know, sir, malakai idea there. So I told him, I said, you know, every place I travel in Beard, there are people queued up at the corners waiting for tractors to come and pick them up. I said, why don't you just create a simple app to pick up people and have motorcycles? And just in what people have done, I was a big investor in Hero. In Hero, we were making motorcycles for African markets with longer, seats, where people, like 4 people could sit at the same time. So I said, like, just create elongated seats and just go around, making people travel. So people there are ideas, they exist in other markets. We just have so much entrepreneurship options in this country. So, by the way, I'm so glad you're doing this.
Thank you so much, because sleepless nights, I can tell you, because when we started it, nobody had heard of entrepreneurship, a school of entrepreneurship, and design and innovation and so on. So I think it's worked, and thank you so many students for supporting us on this. Okay, now this is just the last two questions, which first one is from a student, the other one we stopped it with a faculty member. The Vedant, are you around? Okay, here's young Vedant. What is the one thing that makes you jump out of bed every morning?
Solving a problem. Undoubtedly. If I don't have a problem to solve, I feel extremely lethargic about getting out of bed. So I think, which is why I think one of the things, if I feel accomplished, I feel like moving on. And that's what happened to me. I moved on from banking into private equity at that point of time. I will leave private equity at some point of time, because when I feel I've done what I wanted to do, I will move on. You know, even in my social sector projects, I'm very clear it is about solving a problem. When that problem is solved, then I feel like solving a new problem. But I'm very goal oriented. That's why I hold myself, I set clear goals, clear milestones for my team and myself. And once, you know, so my social sector spending, the point that ma'am made about, you know, ROI, it's very important to me. It's not about writing checks, it's about achieving an objective. You know, so once I know the problem is solved, I move on. That's why getting up in the morning, it is about what's the problem to be solved, and how am I going to move the goalpost on trying to solve that problem. And that's why often I also get very depressed. If that problem is not solved and I've had a setback, I actually feel very low. I often, you know, I cry and I do all kind of stuff. And then, you know, people around me rally me up and all that. So, but I'm about, you know, kind of moving the post along.
So I think Utsav, the faculty here who had a sub-question to Vedant's, he's answered the question, right? He said, and Utsav's question was, if Vedant said, what is one thing that makes you jump out of bed? Utsav's question was, what is one thing that keeps you awake in the night? And I think it's the same thing, right? So
yeah, it is.
It is the same thing. So now finally just my one question, and that is, what next?
What next? The thing that's exciting me most at this point of time, which you know, is actually this project that we have started. So, which is, you know, in the last few years, we've been most focused on farmers' problems in the foundation, you know, and capacity building. Those are the two things that have, in the social sector, those are the two things that have really kept us most busy. I've handed over the day-to-day running of Bain Capital to my partner Pawan Singh, and I feel good about having built the leadership team there, so I continue just playing a leadership role at the Asia level, but at least the day-to-day operations are now in good hands. So I'm focusing more on the foundation, and but the project that's exciting me the most is actually extreme violence against women. You know, given all the incidents of rape, and particularly the heinousness of the crimes, in the last few months we actually started doing research. So it was, we decided to do something different, which is we started actually doing a little bit more, given in my kind of nerdish fashion, we started doing more analytical runs, data-based runs on what is happening. We started looking at research reports, doing research on what's the mind of a rapist, looking at people who had actually gone and interviewed rapists in Tihar jail, Sabarmati jail, to really understand how can you prevent rape as opposed to post-rape, what to do. And that project has actually started, that's actually now become my obsession. So let's see where that
is that pan-India or just Mumbai?
No, pan-India.
Pan-India.
I mean, I think it has to be pan-India's, but yeah, I mean, my goal is in that, if we can come up with a framework for reducing extreme violence against women in India by 50% in 15 years, then I can die in peace.
So, you know, I must say I contributed very little to that when I became the sheriff of Mumbai, we started the first, Mumbai's first helpline called 1298, Women's Helpline, and it still functions. And we get about 30 to 35 calls every day. This was against harassment, and it was started by two young people who had started the 1298 ambulance company. And they said that they would receive all the calls, and then the police joined hands with us, and they started 108, because we didn't have any helpline in Mumbai at all. And if it's an emergency, then the police gets in. But if it's like drinking, the husband beating the wife and so on, we're still able to cope with those answers.
That's amazing.
And we'll be able to send you some more information.
I love that.
So that you'll be able
Love
to get
that,
that.
yeah.
So with this, I think if everybody's satiated and had enough, we can then, anything, a parting message that you would like to give the students?
Parting message, I would just say, look, they're all young folks. I would just say that, whenever I interact a lot with young folks, especially on campus. I love spending time on campus. And I tell people that often, intelligence is highly overrated. I have a friend from my kindergarten days sitting in the audience. He knows I wasn't the topper of my class. And many of the toppers of our class actually didn't land up doing so well in life. And many of them got burnt out actually. Doesn't mean the toppers will burn out. I'm just saying so. What it takes to succeed over time is I've realized in reflection, is a lot of other things. It is about creativity. It is about communication. It is about teamwork. It is about empathy. And it's about one thing which is, I think, most underrated, which is perseverance. All these things actually make up a lot for raw intelligence. I think it's very important as youngsters to be cognizant of that and focus on a lot of these other things. I think also 21st century learning, my wife tells me she focuses a lot on these things, like I'm sure you do, she's an educator like you, is a lot about all these things. And I think it's very important. Knowledge today is available on Google and on this, but all these other things are not. So it's very important to be cognizant as we think about what is going to take to succeed. All of you guys are going to step out soon. It's really cognizant to think about this. Think about your work ethic. Think about how you're going to communicate, how you're going to present yourself, how you're going to interact with each other, and how hard you're going to work. And I think, God bless you all. That's all.
Thank you so